James, welcome to Quantum Messages. Thanks for joining the show.
Thank you, Addie. I'm really pleased to be here.
Yeah, so I first came across your work on Rob's show, Typical Skeptic Podcast 2.0, which was very recent. And James, you spoke about your abduction experiences, military connections, your connection to ETs, and many other paranormal experiences that you have encountered along your journey so far. And so when you were doing the interview, it triggered all kinds of memories for me. And I used you as a reference multiple times when I did my interview with Rob. And I find it interesting that we both grew up in the same place in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's some type of connection that we have to these weird paranormal experiences and or ET experiences. And so I'm just curious, when did this all begin for you? Can you tell us your story?
I would say I first became at a conscious level, and then I forgot, and I'll explain that, in Corpus Christi, Texas. My dad was in the Navy, and at the time he was stationed right there in the Gulf of Mexico at NAS Naval Air Station Corpus Christi, and also at Naval Air Station Kingsville, which wasn't too far away. And I told the story a number of times before, but I'll just quickly go through it.
Yeah.
I was playing, I guess, playing in my bedroom. This would have been circa 68, 69 maybe. And I remember it was dusk. I had those Venetian blinds that were, partially open, and I could see the waning rays of sunlight coming in, and I could see the dust mote suspended in air, right? And I was just noting this phenomenon, looking at it, and very curious about it. And then I felt a presence, and I turned around, and there was this short, diminutive being floating in the air. And it wasn't a classic gray. It was brown. It didn't have an oversized head, had a slit for a mouth, round black eyes, and it spoke to me telepathically, telling me I have some kind of future role, something or other, right? Now, as a kid, my immediate concerns weren't, curiosity, or I wasn't really concerned about what what the creature was all up to. I was being very territorial. It's like, what are you doing in my bedroom? These are my toys, right? And then I threatened to go and get my mom and to chase this intruder away. And it said something to me. Go ahead, she won't see me, right? So when the thing wouldn't leave, I went over to my mom, who was ironing my dad's Navy uniform in the living room. And I remember distinctly it was a black seaman's uniform, and they only wore those in the autumn and in the winter. So the event I'm describing happened in the autumn or the winter sometime. And I kept saying, Mom, there's a little man in my room. There's a little man in my room. My mom wasn't having a bar of it. She was just too busily engaged ironing my dad's uniform. So I literally grabbed her by the elbow and pulled her to my bedroom and opened the door triumphantly and see, look. And of course, nothing was in there. And my mom got angry. She stormed off, presumably to continue ironing. And then I went into the bedroom, closed the door behind me, and then the being appeared again, almost with this "I told you so" kind of expression, even though you really can't make out some like facial expressions. That's the impression that I got. And for some time after that, I told anyone who would listen about the little gray man, but he wasn't really gray. It was just, I didn't have an artificial light on. It was dusk. It was dark in the room. So to me, my childhood perception, it appeared gray, but it was more brownish. Okay. And I remember when we moved to Daly City, you're an old Barry gal, you know what I'm talking about. For those who
Mm-hmm.
don't know, Daly City is right next to San Francisco. And I walked those streets as a kid, Schwerin, all those streets. And the Cow Palace was literally just blocks from my house. And I went there many, many times. And so we moved first to San Diego for a short while, then up to uh, Daly City, because my dad at that point was stationed at Naval Air Station Alameda, where they used to park. I don't know about now, but they used to park some of the aircraft carriers there. So I got to know some friends there, and but it was Bayshore Elementary School, and then Garnet Robertson Middle School was in Daly City. They were both in Daly City, and I would tell my friends, "Oh, I saw this little gray man in my room when I was, younger," and no one laughed at me. There was no ridicule, nothing like that. Oh, that's interesting, and, but it never happened to me. And it quickly dawned on me, even at that age, that when some of us grow up experiencing phenomena, psychic experiences, what have you, we sometimes get this mistaken notion that it happens to everybody, right? And then we find out later on we're disabused of that notion because no, not everybody has these experiences, or at any rate, they don't remember them, right? It's a key point there. So, I would tell all these people and these friends of mine, nobody laughed at me, but it was just noted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then mysteriously, and this happens to some people who've had alien abduction experiences, that experience, which was in the forefront of my mind, my conscious awareness in Corpus Christi, it just mysteriously vanished. So one day I just stopped talking about the little gray man that was in my bedroom, but the experiences didn't stop. I would wake up with nosebleeds, had missing time experiences, and then come about 74, the summer of 74, we moved to San Jose, which, as you know, is 50 miles south of San Francisco, thereabouts, because my dad was going to be transferred to Naval Air Station Moffett, right there in the northern part of what is now Silicon Valley. It's a very spooky place. That area where Naval Air Station Moffett field is, it's now a federal airfield, last I checked. And they have NASA Ames there. They have the Blue Cube, National Reconnaissance Office, NSA satellite tracking facility. You have the Lockheed Missile and Space Division there, where they build the spy satellites. Very spooky places. And NAS Moffett was right in the midst of all that. And we moved there in the summer of 74. And I remember my distinct shock because, when we moved, summer vacation had just started. And back then we had 3 months off, right? And I was all
Mm-hmm.
stoked. Okay, summer vacation. Come to San Jose. No, you still got to go to school. We have a year-round cycle here, right? And the neighborhood year end, they happen to be on vacation, but like in about a week and a half, you got to go back to school. Now you talk about a culture shock, right? Anyway, it was summer of 74. I remember it distinctly because that was a Super Bowl between Minnesota and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I had a number of experiences then, and in 75 too. I had a stream of UFO related dreams. On one occasion, I was laying in bed and felt the presence, was immobilized, and felt a
Mm-hmm.
cold, long metal probe shoved up my nostril all the way up, heard and felt a painful popping sensation, and blacked
Mm-hmm.
out. And the next morning, there was just blood everywhere, all over my pillow and everything else. And
Mm-hmm.
I had a number of dreams. One of them, very prominent, was about the Sasquatch type being stepping out of a landed flying saucer in front of the house that I lived in there in San Jose. So a lot of that stuff contributed.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a formative upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always something of a reader, so I always was delving into Greek mythology, and I read about, the Travis Walton case and Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker in Pascagoula, Mississippi. So I was open to the subject. I believed in it, but there was a part of me that was kind of terrified of the subject
Mm-hmm.
too. I read about it out of curiosity because I'm into that kind of stuff, but never dreamed, despite the UFO sightings I've had
Yeah.
and the dreams and missing time, that it had anything to do with me. Fast forward to September 1990, I'd spent, this is after I'd had a lot of stuff in 88, but I didn't have a conceptual framework with which to understand all this. But then 1990 rolls around, and I had just come back from my language study program in Germany and got back to San Jose. And then in a series of just a few weeks, I had a series of close UFO encounters. Had an ET, a gray, looking out of my TV screen at me, zapping me in the brain with these electric shocks, basically. And it culminated in a full-blown alien abduction waking encounter. I woke up in my bedroom, and there were 3 reptilian grays there. They took me up into the ship, and just things unraveled from there. And I woke up the next morning, a basket case. I'd promised my
Mm-hmm.
my buddy Dave that I take him to work that day because his car was in the shop. So, I was going to San Jose State at the time, if memory serves. Yeah, I was. And
Mm-hmm.
I promised I'd pick him up, right? So I went to his house the next morning after this abduction experience, and they were doing street cleaning that day. So everyone's cars were in the garage in the street that he lived on, and it just added to my sense of isolation. I'm sitting there parked, the only car out in his neighborhood, waiting for him to come out. And the moment he got in my car, he said, "I had a horrible nightmare last night," and I just kept muttering that over and over and over. So the fear and the curiosity combined to make me go out. If you remember the old bookstore B. Dalton's, I went
Mhm.
there, drove the East Ridge Mall, about 40 minutes from my house, half an hour from my house, and just bought every alien abduction book I could find. The Betty and Drayson Watchers series, if you're familiar with those
Mhm.
books, and the last book that I was able to find, I put off to the end, curiously, was Whitley Strieber's book. Because I
Mhm.
remember when that book first came out, I would see that display there at the stores and the malls. I would just go around it. I didn't even want to
Right.
look at it. So, when I'd read all these other books that cleaned out the store, basically, Communion was the last one. So I had to get that book, and I
Mhm.
read that, and I read Transformation. So eventually moved from San Jose and went down to San Diego, where I joined the San Diego UFO Society, became an active researcher. So basically, in a nutshell, that's my story. And in the
Mhm.
process, I had other things start happening too. When I
Mhm.
was younger, I'd be taken to medical facilities. I had a
Yeah, that's
problematic
strange.
childhood. Yeah, as far
Mhm.
as my health was concerned. So I was taken to Naval Medical Center at Balboa in San Diego. Turned out later on to be a notorious mind control center. And then when we moved to the Bay Area, I was taken
Mhm.
to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, another notorious mind control place. And then I would also be taken to Army Letterman General Hospital on the Presidio in San Francisco, which turned out to
Wow.
be another notorious mind control center. And then so later on, years later, when I began having these military abduction experiences, being taken individually and was part of a group of us, I reflected back on all the weird visits to these medical facilities. So on one occasion, I woke up with these wires plugged into my head, and I'd spent the night at this facility. My mom was under instructions by the doctors, military doctors, to give me a sedative, sleeping pills, supposedly to combat car sickness, right? But
Mhm.
really, it amounted to missing time because very little do I remember of all the times I'd been taken to those facilities.
Mhm.
So when I look back after I was having these experiences in the high desert of Southern California and in San Diego involving the military, I realized this has been going on all my life. I just didn't make the connection till now. So yeah, I'll pause
Mhm.
now if you have any questions or any insight.
Yeah, I do actually. So, just to go back a little bit, when did you have that first encounter with the brown, kind of brown gray being? How old
I
were
would
you?
say I was about 4 years old, so that would
Okay.
have been, I was born in '64. That would have been circa '68.
Okay.
69 at the latest, but around that time frame. And then we moved from there
Mhm.
briefly to San Diego, where my younger brother had this horrific experience. He was hysterical running around at night,
Mhm.
and all he would say is Snake Man." Go figure, right?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
then even before he went to San Diego and Texas,
Mhm.
he already exhibited extreme fear about any lights being turned off. He would go around the house
Hmm.
turning lights on, right?
Huh. I
Because he
yeah.
was just really really scared, and so
Scared of the dark.
uh, scared of the dark. Exactly. It
Mhm.
turned out he was having experiences as well.
So then, I mean, and then there was like a lull. So you moved to San Diego, then you moved to the Bay Area, Daly City. In 1974, 1975, how old were you when you started having
I
that?
would have been 10, going on
Okay.
11.
10, 11,
Being a
and then
Scorpio, I'm always getting my birthday at the end of the year. Everyone else
yeah.
gets it before me. So
Yeah. So, okay, so you were, like, in middle like, kind of approaching middle school, like, 6th grade, and then it started increasing after that. My question is that do you think that the original encounter that you had, that wasn't a abduction experience, that was more of, like, an encounter. Was that being benevolent? Like, kind of warning you ahead of time, or
yeah, so many people have encounters with ETs and other beings, and they're told. Many people are told that you're special. You have some destiny to fulfill. So I take it with a grain of salt, right? I mean, how special can we be if a lot of us are told the exact same thing? But what I do remember is this being was telling me telepathically, you have some kind of destiny to fulfill. You have to do something important in the future. Words to that effect. We've been watching you, etc. And all I can think of is, you're trying to steal my toys. This is my bedroom. Get out of here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way I was processing the whole encounter. It wasn't an abduction. It didn't take me anywhere. I didn't have any missing time. It just
Mm-hmm.
showed up in part of that message, twice
Mm-hmm.
really, because I brought my mom over and then she stormed off and then it reappeared and then it gave
Mm-hmm.
me the rest of the message and it literally just disappeared right in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I remembered that was because when I moved to San Diego, the founder and director of the San Diego UFO Society, Sean Atlantes, was a good friend of mine. He was a hypnotic regression guy, right? So I did a regression with him, and I thought it was a failed regression because nothing new came up about my 1990 experiences and earlier. So I was disappointed, even though he insisted that I was under, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I was disappointed because nothing new came up, and he didn't try to lead me or anything. And then I was reading Dr. Kenneth Ring's book, UFOs, NDEs, and the Mind at Large. And at the back of that book, there is a questionnaire. And at
Mm-hmm.
about question number 17, 18, it asked, as a young child, did you ever see or experience little people or have little friends that no one else could see, right? And when I read that, coming right on the heels of what I thought was a failed uh, regression session, when I
Mm-hmm.
read that question, that story I told you about when I was a boy in
Mm-hmm.
'68, it just opened up in my conscious awareness like a zip file. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything that happened uh, just kind of opened up right in my brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I called up my friend Sean. I go, "Oh, you won't believe what happened." It's like I was reading this book, and then out of this thing, this memory came, right? Uh, but I can't. There's no way for me to convey to the listener or the viewer what it was like to have that memory reopen in my conscious awareness because I remembered every detail, right, about that experience, and there was no missing time. It was just interesting how, and it shows the degree of mind control that these aliens can exert. That what was such a formative experience that I told everyone I could about it for a long time, and then mysteriously forgot about it, and then for it to reopen again after what I thought was a failed regression. I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was very interesting. So anyhow, uh, that helped, you know, give me
That
some background as to what was going on.
So, I mean, what is the difference between? So, how do you know whether you are being manipulated by military and or actual UFO or ET? Like, what's the difference between them? Because the
What
military
differences?
does have the technology, right, to be able to create grays, like almost like
Yeah,
robotic.
I would say by this point there have been
Yeah.
reports for some time now uh, of advanced craft jointly crewed by humans and gray aliens in
Mm-hmm.
particular. So that's been going on for a while, and it's quite possible, since at least some of these gray factions seem to rely on cloning and genetic engineering to maintain their form, right? And of
Mm-hmm.
course, in this hybridization process, they want to extract some DNA and soul essence with it in order to upgrade themselves. So there's that factor going on. But I would say, from what I've been able to discern,
Mm-hmm.
when the military gets involved, there are going to be times, whether it's an alien or a military experience, when you're going to have no memory whatsoever. You're just going to wake up. There'll be a bunch of marks and bruises, or sometimes no bruises at all, no marks
Mm-hmm.
at all, no memory, no dream fragments, nothing, right? But you know something has happened. So there's that factor. But the times when I would say that I kind of caught the military doing what they do,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes compared to the aliens, at least back then, it may become maybe more sophisticated now, but. Uh, at times there seemed to be almost a ham-fisted aspect to the way the military did things. It was a lot of things were done by brute force, like
Mm-hmm.
some abductees or MILABs have described the military coming right into their house in broad daylight, full waking consciousness, abducting them, kidnapping them, hauling them away, right?
Right.
With me, I would find myself in these uh, training scenarios in these facilities, installations, either by myself, other people I didn't know, or some people that were my MILAB abductee friends. And my perceptions and consciousness were altered or affected in some way, because it seemed to me at times when I was going through these experiences, when I would wake up and have recall of them, or a fragmented recall, there was like a dreamlike quality to it. Like, was I really there? That I really experienced it? Now, fortunately for me, one of my good friends, Lorena, who I've had on my show, and she lived in the high desert of Southern California. I spent a lot of time in her house where there was active portal entries where the reptilians and military were coming in, right? And she had an astonishing level of conscious awareness during her experiences, not all the time, but frequently.
Mhm.
And she would say to me, "No, that's not a dream," because I call her up. "I had you in a dream last night, Lorena. This is what I
Mhm.
remember. Do you remember? Or you know what happened last night?" And then she'd fill in the blanks.
Mhm.
I would say, "Yeah, I thought it was a dream, or I thought maybe it was an astral experience," because that's another part of the fudge factor. Because
Right.
when you're there and that you're taken by the military, are you taken physically? Are you
Right.
taken astrally? Is it an astral dreamscape virtual environment scenario, right? So I wish I had the dream recall and the conscious awareness, the ability to retain some degree of conscious awareness during these military and or alien experiences.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I don't, but
Mhm.
there are times when these dreams with the military were quite vivid. Uh, and a lot of times they involved a lot of physical activity, lots of running, lots of swimming. I can swim, but I'm not a strong swimmer. But in some of these experiences, it just seemed like that's all I was doing. And
Mhm.
also the running, just incessant, prolonged periods of running where you're saying to yourself in the midst of it, this can't be a dream, because I
Mhm.
can't wake up from it. I just keep running this course. And one of the training courses that I was in, it seemed to be adjacent to a beach. There was a sandy part, forest, like not really forested, but trees, what have you. If you remember those park horses that you found in the parks in the old days, where
Mhm.
you'd walk along the jogging trail, and then there would be like a sit-up station, and you go a little further ahead, and there would be pull-ups, right? It wasn't quite like that. You would have obstacles every once in a while, but there was just lots and lots of running, and I would see other people training. Children, even. I would see a lot of children being put through their paces. Nothing horrifically being done to them in an abuse sense, although one could argue just making them run incessantly is a
Mhm.
form of abuse. I would agree with that part. But in some of these experiences, there would just be a lot of physical activity. And others, I would find myself in an installation or on a runway. I would find myself in a hangar, or a military facility that looked like a big medical clinic. Sometimes these places, I got the impression they were underground, and
Mhm.
sometimes these underground bases or hospital settings would be teeming with other people, presumably people like me, I would imagine. But some of them would be in their night clothes, some of them would be in hospital smocks or hospital gowns, some would be dressed just in normal civilian type clothes. You would see a medical staff there. You would see military people there sometimes. So, the experiences varied. But
Mhm.
yeah, but to answer your question,
Mhm.
some of the experiences that I had of a military nature, I woke up with pretty good memory recall in the morning, and other times not so much. But the blanks sometimes were filled in, because it wasn't just Lorena that was being abducted in a military sense, but other friends of mine. Craig
Mhm.
Bowers, who I've had on the show, also he still is a buddy of mine, and we did a lot of field work there in the high desert, and he was taken a lot, and we would see each other being
Mhm.
put through these training scenarios, right? So, and a lot of the training had to do at the time with survival, foraging, finding clean, drinkable water, uh, being taught how to come up with a division of labor, right? People would assume like leadership roles. Other people would just do their task, and we were put through a lot of psychological uh, kind of behavior modification, if you will, to test our reactions or feelings or emotions when presented with certain scenarios, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I just ran the gamut of all kinds of different things. I mean, I don't recall anything really spectacular. You hear a lot from these people
Right.
today that have had experiences and would describe themselves as a super soldier, but I wouldn't, because to me,
Mhm.
super implies, fantastic and
Right.
stupendous, and soldier implies being a minion,
Mhm.
a servant of some kind of warmonger master. And I would
Mhm.
describe myself as neither, right?
So, why do you think this is happening? Are they preparing you for something that potentially could happen in the future because they're able to jump timelines and see what's potentially could happen in the future? And so, I mean, why else would you be training physically and, trying to find water and, survival type of stuff?
Yes, and it was very constant, that kind of training. There was a lot of
Mhm.
that training, and sometimes it would delve into seemingly real world operations where we would be in some conflict-ridden place somewhere in the world, right? In
Mhm.
what state of consciousness or what state of being, I couldn't say for sure. It could have been there astrally, and it could have been there physically. I'm talking about back then, the '90s. That would have been the former Yugoslavia, when they were in the process of breaking it up.
Mhm.
Places in the Middle East, Persian Gulf. I mean, it varies, and sometimes the experiences people have, they're being used as an intelligence asset or an operational asset by one group or another. And
Mhm.
the targets, the people that they're interacting with, it could be some enemy in a geopolitical surface sense, or it could be some, deep black aspect to it as
Mhm.
well, right? Because I've heard stories, I have no reason to doubt that some of these people that MILABs have been tasked to spy on or operate against, run the gamut from South American drug lords to organized crime elements, in against organized crime elements and intelligence agencies of other countries. I'm not going to say which,
Mhm.
right? Uh, But that happened too, because I mean these are classic Manchurian candidate type people. But
Mhm.
getting back to your question about the survival, I'm reminded of what Dan Sherman was told in his experiences. He wrote the book Above Top Secret or Above Black, something like that. But he talked about
Mhm.
his involvement as a young boy. His mother was an alien abductee, and while he was still in the womb, Dan Sherman, the Zetas were upgrading him while still in his mom's womb, with the intention one day that he would be what was known as an intuitive communicator. And
Mhm.
then as he grew up, he was shunned into this program, into that. Eventually, he winds up in the Air Force Security Service, which was a branch of the National Security Agency. And he was a telepathic communicator, between him and the Greys, a faction of the
Mhm.
Zeta Reticuli. And he was told by his superiors in the Air Force that the reason we're doing this program is because one day in the future, the grid's going to go down. No one's going to be able to communicate with one another, but we still have to maintain comms with this particular race of ETs, right? That doesn't
Mhm.
preclude the possibility that other elements, or maybe even the same branch of the Air Force, were involved with other groups of ETs. But
Mhm.
the emphasis of that program was with these Zeta Greys that were abducting all these people, right?
Mhm.
So, point of relevance is, from an early age, he was groomed, his psychic abilities enhanced. He was taught how to increase his psychic abilities. And then he gets in this program where he's told that they have to maintain this line of comms because the grid's going to go down at some point. And I think that
Mhm.
that was a key facet of a lot of this training, that at some level we were made to understand that we're going to have to survive in an
Yeah.
apocalyptic scenario. So I think
Mhm.
that's where a lot of that training came in, to teach us
Mhm.
how to survive in such. And the the memories and the techniques, what have you,
Mhm.
they may not be in our conscious awareness, right? But it's possible that when the balloon goes up, let's say,
Mhm.
the switch may be flicked, who knows? But suddenly it's possible that we'll start to remember what we need to do in order to survive all this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it goes pretty deep. And are you still experiencing abductions or in the, sleep state, hypnagogic state? Are you astral traveling to these other realms still in training?
Not as often as I used to. I used to be a frequent flyer in an astral sense.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I'm satisfied that one or another group of ETs that were abducting me back then, and this especially in my high school years, in when I was a sophomore, especially in that would have been late 70s, right? 78,
Mm-hmm.
79. I was having a lot of out of body experiences, and I realize now that some of these astral experiences were externally engendered by these ETs because they would beam me with a certain frequency that would make me involuntarily leave my body. And there were times when I was just laying in bed, restless, unable to sleep, but I was
Mm-hmm.
out of my body the whole time. And that was the reason why I couldn't fall asleep because I was fully conscious. I just
Right.
didn't realize I'd already come out of my body. And on one occasion, this large bluish white circle was cast onto my wall in the middle of the night in San Jose. I was in high school by now. I looked at it and I turned away and put my face up against the wall because I didn't want to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then curiosity got the better of me. I rolled over and looked over at that wall, and now there was a big bluish white triangle, right? I got to
Mm-hmm.
check this out.
Mm-hmm.
So no sooner had that thought entered my head than that I was going to investigate what this was all about. Next thing you know, my nose was inches away from the wall, just like
Mm-hmm.
that. Then I turned to look, and there was my sleeping body in bed. Yeah, then the coin dropped. Oh, there's an out of body experience, right?
Yeah.
And once again, to get over all the fear and trepidation, I
Mm-hmm.
was immersed in reading about astral travel. And that's why I got all the books I could find from Robert Monroe and read up on
Mm-hmm.
those books to help me kind of gain control over this, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
happened in the 70s, late 70s going into the 80s. So I don't know why I veered off in that direction, but the point is that they were messing with me not only in the physical sense, not only in the familiar medical procedure sense, but also astrally as well, and a lot of astral dreamscape manipulation, countless dreams of UFOs, of seeing alien craft, alien invasions. So,
Mm-hmm.
getting back to your question of are they still happening? Well, the last time I could say something seemed to happen was a couple of months back. I had a long dry spell. With me, it was always cyclical, where
Mm-hmm.
I would have like a series of experiences, and then nothing, over it would happen for a few years, besides the odd, unusual dream or something like that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then they would cycle back again. I'm talking about the ETs here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was in that phase where nothing was going on seemingly for a long time. Then, like a couple of months ago, something happened, which I'm, curious about. I can't
Mm-hmm.
remember the details, but I know something happened in the sleep state, and there was a presence, and I felt. But
Huh.
there have been a number of times when I try to fight off an astral abduction because the ETs, as well as the
Yeah.
military, but the ETs definitely can abduct you astrally. There have been numerous times, last several years when I've had to stop them or try to stop them from taking me astrally.
Yeah, I've had that experience too. It's funny that you said a couple months ago because I too had an experience a couple months ago. So I wonder, yeah, and that happens for me as well. Like there will be a break and a lull, and then all of a sudden, boom, comes back.
Yeah.
You know, and you had mentioned before that you believe that there is a link between your genes or your DNA and these type of paranormal experiences.
I would say so. I think that
Yeah.
every person of every ethnicity, there
Mhm.
has to be some reason why these different groups of ETs and interdimensionals, what have you, and the military are interested in certain bloodlines. I think, and it's been a working hypothesis of mine, that
Mhm.
there are latent metaphysical powers locked up in the genetic profile of certain individuals in certain family trees. It's more pronounced in some than others. Like in America, for example, very common. You will find people, alien abductees and or MILABs, that have the Scotch, Irish, Welsh, Gaelic background on the one hand and Native American on the other. It's a very common one. Or you also see, Germanic or Scandinavian, Mediterranean. I mean, it varies.
Yeah.
But these metaphysical, latent metaphysical powers, the ability to plug into the information field, if you will, some call it the Akashic record, what have you. The controllers, be the alien and increasingly the military, they seem to be able to draw out these metaphysical powers, latent abilities, even like memories and recall and abilities. I know people that have been, excuse me, interrogated by the military, and they wanted to know about their past lives. It wasn't so much that they were interested in what they were doing in the here and now. They had a pretty good idea, but they were interrogating some people about who they were or what they did in past incarnations. And I would say that from that standpoint, it's not just our human linear timeline incarnations here on Earth, but some of our incarnations in a past parallel reality where we were not even human, what we would call aliens, some of us, right? So I think that there are genetic markers in our DNA which indicate strongly to these controllers that, okay, this person is from a family tree, that they're likely to have experiences with this type of ET or that type of ET. Plus, we can't forget about the influence some of these ETs have, that the elements of the government and military are in cahoots with, right? That whole Dan Sherman project, the Zeta Greys he was in telepathic contact with were sending him details. Well, they were not really details. It was a serial number designation, a time when they abducted and returned someone, and coordinates, latitude and longitude. And he would get a whole stream of these. Each serial number designated an individual. And that's all he would get all day long when he'd do an 8-hour shift. Is just these were the humans that faction of Zeta Greys was working with or allowed to abduct per the terms of the treaty, right? And that's just one ET race. That's just one faction of the Zeta Greys. There could have been others doing this as well. So, by process of elimination, statistical probability, some of those people that were being listed and being sent over the details to Dan Sherman and people like him, some of those people must have been MILABs, had to be, not just alien abductees, but some of them. So, point of relevance is the military knows which which family trees certain ET groups are interested in. They know that there's a metaphysical component to the DNA of these abductees and MILABs, and they seek to exploit them in an operational sense, right? So basically, these MILABs are being used as like intelligence operations assets, right? And like my friend Luena said, the military would tell her, "Who's going to believe you? You're just a housewife from Apple Valley, right?" And then they would put her through all this training. She would be jumping out of helicopters and doing all this other stuff, right? So, but again, that's a very valid point. Who's going to believe her, right? Especially around that time, they kept putting out all these TV shows, Dark Angel and other things to kind of inoculate the public, so to speak, with the notion that, oh yeah, there's these deep black shadowy elements out there of the government and the intelligence community that exploit little children and train them up to be operatives and assassins. So they put that meme out broadly in TV and in cinema, but meanwhile, people are really undergoing experiences that far surpass anything that you see on TV or in cinema, right?
So just to go back, a MILAB is a deceitful military operation, right? Performed by the military?
My definition of a MILAB is someone who is first and foremost a legitimate alien abductee.
Okay.
There may be other people out there that have their own definitions, but that's mine because that's my personal experience. Everyone that I've known, interacted with on a personal basis, that have had MILAB experiences, they've also had real alien encounters. Now, there are people out there that are in projects where the alien aspect isn't really emphasized, right? Or seems to be non-existent. There seems to be overlap, with people that have undergone cult abuse and what have you with the ETs, because statistically, some of the people in the cults or trying to break away from the cults, they're from
Right.
these family bloodline trees that also have alien experiences and also reptilian experiences.
Mm-hmm.
We are in a reptilian sphere of influence, and the main fundamental building block of the
Mm-hmm.
reptilian control is hybridization. They've imbued the best, so-called, from them into
Mm-hmm.
us, which becomes the worst of us, right? So they've imbued us with their genetics, behavior, uh, everything that you can think of to totally subvert our society, our civilization from within. And they've elevated to key influential policy-making levels all these demented, deranged reptilian Draco hybrids to
Mm-hmm.
lord it over us, right? These are the hybrid plantation managers, as I call them. So
Mm-hmm.
this is a war of genetics. It's spiritual warfare
Mm-hmm.
manifesting on the physical plane. It's full spectrum dominance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Physically, emotionally, astrally, interdimensionally. This whole control system, which we have to break out of, and I'm satisfied some of us will.
Mm-hmm. So, can you explain the difference between the Greys, the Dracos, the Reptilians, and are the Reptilians, are they physically reptile looking like the Unas and SG1, Stargate SG1, or are they more parasitical reptiles that can infiltrate a system, an organic, biological system, and then control it that way?
That's a
How?
good question. There's different groups of them. They're
Mm-hmm.
not all the same. There seems to be, from the reports I've had, even underground on our planet, in the deep subterranean cavern systems, there seems to be conflict between the reptilian races. Some reptilian races seek to assert control, dominion over others, enslave them, kill them off if they have to, right? So even amongst the reptilians, the different variants, species, hybridized groups, what have you, there
Mm-hmm.
seems to be some conflict. And I've known people that have had experiences with reptilians, and sometimes there seems to be, and we really can't be sure if it's a case of good cop, bad cop, but there seem to have been times when people have had encounters with friendly or at least benign, neutral reptilians. Sometimes they would leave it like a cryptic message or a warning or something, but they didn't seem to have any intention to harm or mislead, the people.
Mm-hmm.
And at times when these friendly reptilians would show up and try to help someone, I'm thinking of one gal in particular, uh, when the other reptilians would find out that the one reptilian had broken, away from the rest of the pack and was actively helping someone, the other reptilians would come down like a ton of bricks on, the helpful reptilian. Sometimes they'd never be heard from again, right? So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they step out of ranks and feel some degree of sympathy or empathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for the reptilian controlling uh, uh, players, the last thing they want for their brethren is to have empathy. They don't want them to feel empathy and sympathy and pity for us. They just want to destroy us, right? And manipulate us and what have you. So the hybridization comes in is that's the main fundamental building block of this control system. The
Mm-hmm.
reptilians, to me, seem to be at the top of the heap here on this planet. The Draco are the winged reptilians. They seem to be this kind of aristocratic royalty class,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the white Draco. You've heard reports probably
Mm-hmm.
of the white Draco. They seem to be at or near the top of the heap in the reptilian scheme of things. But some of them work in cahoots with mantis beings. There seems to be a relationship between some of the gray factions and the reptilians. The grays that work for the reptilians, they seem to be under some form of cosmic vassalage, homage to the reptilians, because this is a reptilian sphere of influence. So some of these gray factions, they do a lot of the heavy lifting, the abducting, the medical procedures, but they're really working to advance the reptilian agenda as
Mm-hmm.
far as the hybridization is concerned. However, that does not preclude some of those same gray factions from wanting their piece of the cake as well,
Mm-hmm.
harvesting DNA, harvesting fragments of souls, whatever the case may be, in order to upgrade, revivify their species, if you will, right? Because it's clear that some of the gray factions are genetic constructs. So they don't have any outward sexual reproductive organs, no genitalia. So they've had to rely on cloning and the transference of consciousness from an old dying body into a newer clone body. Just as you see in Stargate, you mentioned
Yeah.
Stargate earlier. That was a problem that the Asgard were having. The
Yep.
Asgard was a gray race. They had to
Yeah.
keep cloning themselves, right? And I think that there's some basis in reality to that. So, point being is that some of these gray, excuse me, gray groups may be working for the reptilians, trying to carve out their own little empire, fiefdom within that context, if you will.
So the reptilians, are they physically looking? How do they physically look? Like a reptile, or like I said earlier, is it more of like a parasite that's in the system, in the body?
The thing about some of the reps is
Mm-hmm.
they're masters of density and frequency. So,
Mm-hmm.
people get all caught up in semantics. Oh, well, are they interdimensional? Are they,
Right.
uh, are they more astral, parasitic? And I think that some fall into, all of the above, because they have the ability to alter their frequency and their density. They could be invisible in our, in our visual spectrum, but they can still leave an impression of weight on a mattress or, on a shag sofa, something like that, right? I mean, their ability to make themselves invisible, even as they're sexually assaulting a woman, in our example, where the woman may not see anything, but she knows there's a presence doing this to her. Uh, she may be able to move her hands and her arms when she's in paralysis and try to, block her privates. But curiously, paradoxically, something is still getting in there, right? The parts he's trying to protect. Likewise, their ability to scratch people and leave marks, grip marks, pressure marks from their talons and their fingers on us while they're invisible, right? Uh, Sometimes, they'll manifest physically and they'll densify and then they'll swipe somebody. One of my friends was in a relationship with a Navy guy, and ironically, the Navy guy was aware of this program going on at I think it's Point Mugu Naval Air Station, where they converted a P-3 Orion, loaded it down with sensitive electronic gear, and they called it the UFO chaser because that's what it was. One of its tasks, to fly around and try to locate and identify where these UFOs are coming and going. And so the reptilian that was having sex with my friend was jealous of this guy, this Navy guy. And when he was in the shower, the thing pulled back the shower curtain and just, took a swipe at him and left like these little long, three-fingered, familiar claw marks, straight parallel claw marks on the guy's back, and assaulted him basically, right? So, point being is that they can densify. Generally, I would say there's three reptilians, and they're not mutually exclusive. Some fall into, one of all three. The subterranean ones that have been there all along, ones from elsewhere in the cosmos who literally come here in spaceships and or portals, stargates, and interdimensional ones that generally stay just out of phase of our physical density dimension, if you will, but can interact with it. Like I just mentioned earlier, their ability to densify, their ability to interact. I mean, to knock over things. I've had an invisible reptilian push over a very heavy fake tree nearly on top of me, right? I mean, this thing would have crippled me if it hit me, right? But and then we tried to reproduce the effect. It was so heavy, it took me and another adult man that happened in his house in High Desert, Southern California, to push this thing off of me, right? So their ability, because I was just about to say something that they didn't like, right? because I was visiting Lorena's house where all this activity was taking place, right? And
Mhm.
just as I was able to get this thought out, it read my mind and pushes this thing over, and darn near hurts me, right? Uh, so it did that in from an invisible standpoint, but it was there.
Mhm.
So you have physical ones that I think for the most part reside in our physical density, whether underground or off world. But again, many of them have the ability to alter and change their density to
Mhm.
suit their environmental needs, let's say, in any given dimension, any given plane of existence. That's the problem that we've had when we go to sleep, especially because of these beings, some of them, they have the tactical high ground. They can literally enter into us as we're sleeping and take over our astral dreamscape and
Mhm.
create stage managed dreams from within us. They slip in while we're sleeping and they take over our dreams and they can eroticize them, make them very frightening, whatever the case may be. So,
Mhm.
but I do think the fundamental concepts are changing. Uh, it's possible things are not as easy for them to mess with people on, people like us that have had experiences
Mhm.
as easy as it had been before, right? At least for some people. So I
Mhm.
don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. So do you think that, in the sleep paralysis state, because I've experienced that multiple times, do you think that that is a sign that, or could it actually be something else? Because there's, demons and ghosts and all kinds of other things too. So how do you know the difference between, reptilians, grays, demons? Like, how do you know?
That's a very good question. And like
Okay.
from the fundamentalist Christian perspective, well, they're
Mhm.
all demons. But then when you break down the
Right.
etymological roots of the term daemon, it
Yeah.
refers back to aliens, like
Mhm.
celestial sailors on board angelic vessels, as Pierre
Mhm.
Sabak would talk about. That guy's brilliant. But excuse me,
So you
the
think it's actually ETs messing around.
there is definitely a demonic element.
Uh-huh.
Where they're not necessarily ETs coming from other worlds, either
Mhm.
from a Stargate or a ship, but they're, lack of a better term, homegrown. Right? They've been here all along, just out of phase of our 3D, rapidly increasing to fourth dimensional
Mhm.
perspective.
Mhm.
Like some of my friends who've had ET experiences, they do investigations and hauntings and what have you. That's something that I don't do. That's too
Mhm.
scary, too frightening for me, right?
Mhm.
Because I've known cases where people have gone to extremely haunted, demon-infested locales, and
Mhm.
when they go back home after they finish their investigations, the darn things follow them, right? And I mean,
Yeah.
I've
Start
got
getting
enough
the
problems
attachment.
with
Yeah.
ETs in the military. I
Yeah.
don't need to bring
No.
demons into my life, right? Uh,
No.
but there does seem to be some overlap because
Yeah.
the behavior of some of
Mhm.
these ETs and reptilians, whether they're from off-world or subterranean or interdimensional, and again,
Mhm.
they're not mutually exclusive, right? Some of these reptilians have been here so long underground, they might as well be considered earthlings, right? And
Mhm.
then there's some enmeshment and overlap because some of the off-world reptilians interact with the reptilians that have been here all along, right? So it's kind
Mhm.
of a mixed bag. But you have a scenario where we humans are under this long-term predation, genetic harvesting, soul manipulation, soul harvesting, what have you. And at times the behaviors of some of these reptilians in our example, they can be quite demonic, indistinguishable. Like one of the experiences I had, this reptilian, a Draco in this instance, that was manipulating a certain individual I knew in the UFO field. And because I was aware of that person undergoing this Draco reptilian manipulation, that particular Draco bore animus towards me, right? And
Mhm.
it entered into my sleeping body one night and
Mhm.
put me in this horrific astral dreamscape, stage managed dream scenario where I found myself in a big empty house with this pervasive presence of what I can only describe as satanic evil,
Mhm.
so thick you can cut it with a knife. It's
Mhm.
so thick it make your skin, literally makes your skin crawl, right?
Mhm.
Because the frequency of the vibe is so off compared to the vibe we're giving off, that when they enter into us, it manifests from a physical sensation as like icky, tingly feeling from your head down to your toes, right?
Mhm.
So in this dream scenario, I'm running around this house. It's just saturated with this satanic evil, and this satanic evil in the dream seems to be wanting to get into me and take me over. Now,
Mhm.
little did I know until I woke up and forced myself awake that it was already in
Right.
me as I was laying there sleeping.
Were
And I
you
remember,
paralyzed? Did you have sleep
uh,
paralysis?
yeah, I would say, because I wasn't able to break out of the dream as soon
Mhm.
as I wanted to break the sleep paralysis.
Uh-huh.
Because the ETs, some of the ETs, as well as the military,
Mhm.
they know what parts of our brain to manipulate in order to induce that deep sleep sensation to keep us
Mhm.
in a particular astral dreamscape scenario, manipulation, right?
Mhm.
Just to segue into what the military does, there were times when I was laying in bed immobilized, I can feel parts of my brain being zapped. And there were times with my third eye vision, even when my eyelids were closed, because sometimes when we're exposed or these types of energies are being sent into us and zapping us, right?
Mhm.
In that twilight zone state of partial sleep and partial conscious awareness, your third eye is open. You can see things even through closed eyelids. And on one occasion, I was laying in bed and I distinctly saw through closed eyelids three distinct energy beams coming down, one to the top of my head, one
Mhm.
in my solar plexus, and one in my uh,
Groin.
sexual chakra groin area, right?
Mhm.
And that was through closed eyelids. Point being is that when they do these things, sometimes it enhances our ability, as a byproduct, it enhances our ability to see what they're doing, right? And
Mhm.
I would force my eyelids awake, and then the mind control, the spell would be broken, if you will. And then I would feel that part of my brain being zapped, which induces the heavy sleep state.
Mhm.
And then my eyelids would feel like they weigh a ton. I'd close my eyes, and the moment I close my eyes, whammo, I'm back in that astral dreamscape scenario, training, whatever it is that the hell they're doing to me, right? And that's just what the military does. So imagine if you're laying in bed and a Draco crawls into you interdimensionally and takes your dream over from within. So I'm running around this house screaming, calling out to Jesus, calling out to,
Mhm.
all my angels, just help me, right? And at one point, I ran into a bathroom, and then
Mhm.
I looked at the mirror, and my eyes had this demonic cast to them. And I was like, I'm being
Mhm.
possessed, right? And that's really what they were doing to me at that time. For all intents and purposes, for that moment in time, they infiltrated my dream while I was asleep and were making me think and feel as if I was being taken over by this evil satanic force. So
Mhm.
the shock of seeing myself like that, already taken over, and I was running around the dreamscape screaming in this house, empty house. A lot of my experiences when there was this reptilian alien manipulation
Mhm.
centered in me being in houses that were oddly bereft of furniture, wooden
Hmm.
floors. No, sometimes it would be simulated to look like the house in San Jose, California, where I spent a lot of time. But one interesting aspect was there was never any furniture right in there.
Hmm.
So I'd be having these, experiences and dreams of UFOs flying over the house and running around, but there'd be no furniture. So that was a very common scenario. And what they do in order to put us ill at ease is, for the most part, they know that we're generally a cleanly, hygienic race, right?
Mhm.
Certain cultures amongst us anyway. So what they do in order to put us ill at ease in the astral dreamscape, well, and I think that at times there's an element of truth to this. This just isn't some kind of uh, shock factor they throw into our dreams, but we'll see like feces laying around, urine, and what have you, and then we're either barefoot or wearing socks in these scenarios, and we're like
Mhm.
gingerly picking our way through, and we're all grossed out.
Mhm.
But that's an element of control, and in some of these dreamscape scenarios, you see these huge cockroaches scurrying around. So it's
Mhm.
really an ability for them to go into our deepest, darkest recesses of our id, right?
Mhm.
Our subconscious ego, and all these things that we're scared of at an archetypal level. Clowns, sadistic clowns, uh, monsters of the id, filth, grime. Some of the scenarios would be like a locker room scenario or a bathroom scenario where everything is just filthy and disgusting, and that really puts us ill at ease. And up till now, I haven't tested myself. Well, this is just a dream. I'm going to walk right through the feces. No,
No. No.
there's still that element of me that's revolted and disgusted by the whole thing, right?
Right.
So they will use this to their advantage. And so I made myself wake up from the scenario where they were possessing me, essentially. I forced myself awake. I felt this icky, tingly feeling from the head, my top of my head, the tips of my toes. My whole skin was crawling, and this dark cloud was. I was praying out loud by this point. I could feel this thing leaving my body, and as it's leaving, I'm just icky, tingly feeling all over my body. And then I see above me this dark, amorphous mass, kind of like a dark cloud hovering right over me. But that was the entity that had just left me, right? And it was in me moments before, making me think I was being satanically possessed. To cycle back to your point, well, yeah, the behavior of some of these beings, whether they're from here, underground, from off-world, is absolutely demonic and satanic in nature. And the trap in that particular dream also, or that was a different dream, when they come into my body at night when I was sleeping, was the baited hook was this little girl who was possessed, satanically possessed. And, in my mind, I wanted to save her some way. Had no idea consciously how to do that, because the girl's eyes had this demonic cast, and this the worst, most evil, concentrated form of satanic evil was emanating from her. And then the more I thought about helping her, the increased even more. And then I understood that, the person that I suspected of having this Draco influence in her life, that little girl represented her. That was that wounded inner child that they had probably suborned from way back when, from a bloodline, interdimensional, a rather multi-generational standpoint, right? So I realized that it's a lost cause. I can't, even if I was somehow to get to this little girl, there's nothing I can do. But the evil emanating from her was literally repulsive. It was literally forcing me back. But that good Samaritan part of me wanted to help her. But then again, it's like it's a lost cause, because what do I do even if I get to her? She's thoroughly satanically possessed. I'm feeling this presence trying to jump into me, So it's this push-pull thing. What can I do for her anyway? Eventually, I gave up. And then, found myself running around in that room all satanically possessed. It was a crappy night all the way around.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's definitely aspects of this that are, for lack of a better term, absolutely demonic.
Okay. So yeah, when you interview me, I'll tell you some of my stories that I've experienced.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Very, very similar. Yeah, I had an experience about a year ago, where they tried to physically take me in my dream, but it was stopped by one of my statues, because I'm very deeply connected to Kali, and I believe that statue stopped it from taking me out of my room. So going more into this, just how do we protect ourselves? Because those of us that I'm sure that will be listening to this have had similar experiences, and that are even attracted to these type of interviews. How do we protect ourselves from these type of interactions, like in the astral realm, or even when we're sleeping?
Yeah, you can see the extreme of that, the way they manipulate people who eventually become serial killers and repetitive predators, let's say, of one sort or another, right? Is not only are they manipulating them in the astral dreamscape, compelling them to have these dreams and visions over and over, the astral dreamscape of like aberrant sex, of violence and sadistic sexual violence, etc., etc. But even in normal waking consciousness, and the many serial murderers who, to me, are nothing more than, garden variety, reptilian Draco hybrids, right? Even in their waking consciousness, their minds could be flooded with images, sadistic, violence, especially towards women or children, whatever the case may be, or people in general. And I think certain cultures in general are afflicted with this, entire cultures, and then their ideologies, exacerbate that mentality, right? So, oh, just to rewind, what did you just ask me a moment ago?
How do we protect ourselves?
Oh, yes, it's a frequency war. So,
Mhm.
like what I do personally, okay, like this little thing I wear doesn't seem like much, but it's made by this company here in Australia, and they make another product here called a GeoCleanse Harmonizer. It's a piece of orgone that you plug into an electrical power source, and if I were to unplug it now, right, the whole house would be saturated with just icky electromagnetic energy.
Mhm.
Plug it in, power it up, it takes it away for the most part. It gets rid of it all, right? So, I did have two of them, but I left one of them at a hotel last
Oh
year,
no.
unfortunately. So I need to get another one, but just one should suffice to cover a whole, average size house. But I had two of them, right? One for upstairs, one for downstairs, and then
Mhm.
also tensor rings. I have these huge hula hoop size tensor rings of different gauges,
Mhm.
and also iron. If you
Mm.
or your friends and people listening and viewing can get a hold of good old fashioned horseshoes made of iron, right? See, what they knew in the Middle Ages is that the fairies, the wee folk, it's taken on entirely different meaning, right? The term fairies in the old days in England and elsewhere, that was only brought up, that word, in whispered conversation, because it evoked this whole concept of abductions and children being taken away, replaced by changelings, etc. Right? And what they did was they would put pieces of iron ore into the cot or the crib of children, or horseshoes, right?
Mhm.
Because they had an understanding that iron can provide, for whatever reason, a protective shield around people. That's why they
Huh.
suspended them over the doorways, entrance to the house. I had Steve
Mhm.
Mira on my show, and we were talking about this. It's interesting how, in the case of the people being attacked in Corrales Island, Brazil, they're getting zapped by these light beams from these UFOs, and they would find that these people were severely anemic who survived the ordeal. It's like all their iron content in their blood, which helps to transport you know, hemoglobin, transports oxygen, what have you. It was severely depleted after they'd have these experiences of being zapped by light beings and or being abducted. So,
Hmm.
and then we start hearing stories of them wanting to put synthetic iron, synthetic iron in some of these treatments, so called, right? And I
Mhm.
thought about that. Well, that's interesting, because some of these negative beings don't like iron. They don't like it in our blood, and they don't like it when we leave it around in the form of horseshoes or iron ore. And Steve Mira made a good point, which I never thought about. Notice how difficult it is just to go out and get iron ore. It
Hmm.
should be super abundant. Why is it so difficult, right, to get iron nowadays?
Hmm.
And that, I never thought about that, but that's a very
Mhm.
good point. So I happen to have a friend who, she knew, like, these people that ran like a stable, for horses and what have you, and they had these extra horseshoes, and she gave me a few of them, right? So, I placed them in strategic places around the house. So it cycles back to what you said, because these are tools, energetic power tools that can tend to do the heavy lifting for us, right?
Mhm.
I have this. I still got to find a nice chain for this, because my original chain broke, but this is
Mhm.
uh, there's a 9 coiled uh, tensor, um, and it puts out a toroidal shaped energy field. And
Mhm.
just holding it, I haven't held this in a while, just holding it, I'm sensitive enough.
Mhm.
When I do an energization technique, palms up, feet flat on the ground, ankles not crossed. Right now,
Mhm.
my palms are side by side on the armrest, and I'm pulling in energy right now. I could feel it. I'm that sensitive. I can also, when I do this, I can feel it coming into my crown chakra. Point being is that I'm sensitive enough to energy fields that
Mhm.
I haven't picked this up in a while. I used to wear this around my neck, but it puts out quite a powerful torsion energy field.
Mhm.
Now, it's not a panacea, right? It's not going to uh, prevent paranormal, supernatural experiences in every instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it also helps to have an understanding of how our minds, at a quantum sense, can influence
Yep.
the energy fields around us. When we see the old black and white films of the old Soviet Union, where these people with telekinesis powers are moving around metal objects, what have you, that's all real. I just started watching this. I don't know if it's on Amazon Prime or what channel it's on, but it's called Third Eye Spies. It came out in 2018. It might be in Netflix. I can't remember. But it talks about the Stanford Research Institute, which is from our old stomping grounds there in Palo
Yep.
Alto. Originally started out as a naval intelligence project, naval research, and then the CIA took it over, and then the DIA got involved, Defense Intelligence Agency. So we have these abilities to manipulate energy fields. And on one occasion, I visited a friend of a friend, this gal I knew in San Diego. She said, "Oh, well, this gal, she's interested in what we're interested in,"
Mm-hmm.
and took me over to the house. Long story short, the lady was a reptilian hybrid, and her house was just filled with these burning punks, right? So
Mm-hmm.
just smoke everywhere. I'm an asthmatic, and I'm gasping for breath. And she had crystals everywhere. Everywhere you looked, there were crystals. And then I realized what was going on, because the moment I walked in there, I know when I'm in the presence of a reptilian hybrid, a raging reptilian hybrid, because in my case, the muscles in my forearm, they tense up, and the muscles in my bicep tense up, and sometimes I could feel a pressure or a tugging in my solar plexus in my heart center. When that
Mm-hmm.
happens, I start looking around. I'm looking around for a likely host, and if I don't see a host, okay, there's something around here invisible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I feel that, I automatically put out an energy field, right? In my mind, right? And so, long story short, in a really small sitting room, this lady in front of me who lived there, and our knees are practically touching. And we got into a conversation, and I slipped out, yeah, these negative reptilians, and then she just turned on me and goes, "What makes you think they're reptilian? The reptilians are negative, right?" And I'm thinking, A, how does she know about reptilians? And B, now I understand,
Mm-hmm.
like, the whole point behind all the punks, putting out all the smoke, and just these crystals all over, enhancing her frequency. And then it dawned on me when I walked in, the whole thing was set like a baited trap, right? I'm just
Mm-hmm.
thinking I'm going to meet like a new agey kind of person. No, it was a lady that was a full-on reptilian, androgynous looking hybrid. And so what
Mm-hmm.
happened was we had a silent war of energy fields, right? So we sat across from each other, looking at each other. But the way I use my energy fields is I don't just passively put up like this invisible shield.
Mm-hmm.
No, not me. What I do is I imagine an energy force field kind of like saran wrap or cling wrap, just enshrouding her, and that every with the intention that the more effort she puts into breaking out of that, the stronger it
Mm-hmm.
becomes, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and I was really focused, and we were looking, just eye to eye. Eventually, she broke off, right? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying this to brag.
Mm-hmm.
Point being is that when I came in, my senses were assailed by all the punk smoke and all the crystals. I was disoriented, and
Mm-hmm.
then in a little sitting room, knee to knee with this lady, chairs in front of each other. When I mentioned that thing about the reptilians, and she got defensive, and then I realized, oh, that's the purpose of all the crystals enhancing her energy field. It's debilitating me. I understand now.
Mm-hmm.
Point being is that when we recognize these surroundings and what's going on, I don't have the ability in my normal waking consciousness. When I'm in that sleep twilight zone state, I can see things more, right? But but I can't see entities overshadowing the host humans, the host hybrid humans, the way some of my friends can. That could be
Mm-hmm.
a good thing, could be a bad thing. I don't really know want to walk around and see all these they live characters all over the place. Yeah. However, I can feel them. And there
Mm-hmm.
was an occasion in San Diego when I was, fast forward, this is the '90s, right? And there was two women there in particular that were so thoroughly hosted. One of them was a supervisor, and her reptilian energy field, I could literally feel it when I was in the parking lot. Even before I stepped into the building, I could feel it, because she
Mm-hmm.
must have been like ruminating on something that was causing her like anxiety or something that it just amplified her energy, her reptilian energy. So I walk in, it was literally like walking into a electrical capacitor field. It was literally like walking in and feeling static energy everywhere, right? And it was because of this one woman. And then another occasion, this other hosty woman, I was sitting next to her. It was a customer service call center kind of place. I forget what the product or service we were selling, but anyway, she was in the next cubicle to me, and her energy field, that reptilian energy field that day was very strong. And again, I feel it in my forearms, and my muscles bunch up and tense up. My neck muscles tense up. And when that first started happening, I didn't realize that my body was reacting to the presence of a reptilian, either invisible or had taken somebody up as a host. It came to me when I was in a long car drive, road trip, with someone who was a Draco reptilian host. Because the whole time I sat next to this person, when this person was driving, my hands were gripping the armrest, and my forearms and everything was tensed up. And it wasn't because it was cold. And then I realized later on, when I was in the presence of people, that I detected an entity inside them, and I felt that reptilian energy in my body would tense up. Oh, that's what it is. Point of relevance is we all have this early warning detection system. We just have to recognize the symptoms, if you will, recognize what our senses are telling us, right? So that's another thing. Moment I recognize that presence, whether I'm sleeping or whether I'm out walking around in normal waking consciousness, I just put my shields up and I project it out. I don't just passively put a little wall around me. I look for the likely source of it, and I enshroud it with my energy field.
You're like shrink wrap.
That's it. That's what I do. It's a
You
shrink
can't
wrap.
move.
Yeah.
Yeah, I too sense things as well. I call them dark entities. But I notice that other people are not so privy to it, which is, but I have like deep heightened senses to that as well. But it'd be interesting, yeah, I just call them dark entities, and maybe they are the reptilians or Dracos or who knows what else, but they definitely have, attachments to them for sure. But yeah, I also protect my house and, cleanse my house and make sure that I have all my stuff ready to go. And I purposefully relocated, and it seems like you've relocated all the way out of the country. Did you do that on purpose? Relocate?
Yeah. I came here to live. My wife is Australian, so I came out here to be with her. So yeah, but you'll come across the same places. In the first neighborhood I lived out here, there was a haunted house down the street and around the corner. And what the locals realized was, they'd always had a for sale sign out there. People would buy the house, family move in. Before long, they were out of there, and you saw another for sale sign house. I always wondered what the real estate agents, when they're throwing down the wrap, they're taking them around. Oh, look at this, walk-in closets, and then they run out and then they pour holy water over themselves or something. But yes, when I walked by that house, there was definitely, it was something that you see like on Netflix, a haunting in Connecticut or something. You know what I mean? There was something about that house that would just put me on guard, right? And a lot of people, they didn't know that. They moved right in and they just started experiencing the supernatural, and they were out of there, right? They were never able to keep a family in that house for any length of time. So I'm very sensitive to energies, and I'm glad, right?
Yeah.
I don't have the ability to see them the way other people can in a
Mhm.
day-live fashion, but I can sense their presence, and it's important that people see what they've done with us with the shame-based upbringing and all the behavioral modification and just the inundation of processed foods and everything else is uh, they've made it so we're so shame-based we're not even comfortable in our own skin,
Mhm.
and then we get so distracted with digital devices and everything going on, the TikTok 5 minutes of fame, what have you, that
Yeah.
people are permanently in their headspace instead of being fully embodied. You always hear these new agers, I want to raise my vibrations. Well, let's start with the basics and be
Mhm.
embodied first,
Yeah.
because this is the dimension we're in. We need a firm grounding with terra firma, Mother Earth, right? And
Mhm.
then you can be like an antenna. But what they want to do, they want to raise their vibrations. They're permanently in their headspace, and the headspace is a happy hunting ground for all these entities. We're not
Mhm.
heart centered. We're not feeling things in our solar plexus, not feeling things. And how do they manipulate us? In the alien love bite scenario, when we're like paired up with someone in an alien love bite sense, so the person could be halfway around the world. It doesn't matter. Time
Mm-hmm.
means and distance means nothing. You can literally feel like a tugging on your, like this energetic tugging in your heart
Yep.
center. You can literally feel an energetic tugging in your solar plexus and in your sexual chakra area. So the entities that are manipulating us, and
Mm-hmm.
increasingly for some time, the deep black military, they know that we're energetic bodies, that we're bioelectric beings. And so they manipulate not only us physically, but our various energy fields too, as well, astrally.
So now that AI is coming forth, and on your website, I went and looked at some of your stuff, and you were talking about AI in 2017, 2016, and warning in some of your interviews, I noticed. What is going on right now? That whole agenda, like we're merging into two separate types of humans. One's going towards AI, going to be transhumanism, and then the other one's more earth-based. What do you think
Yes, and
of all
I
this?
think in our dimension, uh, um, no way I can prove this. It's just my intuitive feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Much higher, more spiritually evolved planes of existence, I can see a happy union between what we would call AI and an advanced, spiritually evolved civilization. It's not, this harbinger of doom that we see it here,
Mm-hmm.
because uh, in these higher, more spiritually evolved realms, the beings use it to, enhance their lifestyle.
Uh-huh.
Right. Whereas here, increasingly, it's an element of control. And it's not that AI was discovered or invented. It's always been here throughout our cosmos, our plane of existence, and increasingly in more than one plane of existence. I see it as part of this demiurgic force, right? The Gnostics talk about this demiurge. And one of my friends that I used to work with a lot in the old days, this group of German psychics, Martina was our mystic, our seer. And she described it as, from her third eye perspective, as imagine the center of every galaxy throughout the cosmos, and coming out of the center of that galaxy is this demiurgic force, extending its tendrils and its reach in every direction, in every galaxy. That's
Mm-hmm.
what this demiurgic force is. And then it, in some places, it assumes the guise of this AI.
Mm-hmm.
There's always been this ghost in the machine aspect. They found out in the early days that there was an overlap back in the spiritualist movement days, and when electronics started to kick into high gear, that a lot of people back then were wary of the notion of using radio frequencies, radar, television, what have you, because they knew that it plugged directly into this supernatural realm.
Mm-hmm.
One of my friends I've had on my show on a few occasions, Suplavetic, she's a like a house cleaner. She
Mm-hmm.
goes into homes that are riven with interdimensional portal entries, and she closes them up and makes the entities go away. Right? That's
Mm-hmm.
basically what she does. And she says
Mm-hmm.
that with her third eye etheric vision, when she looks at these like cell phone towers,
Mm-hmm.
and this is even before the 5G rollout, which is underway now,
Yep.
long before 5G, she would see swirling around these communications towers, these black globs that were flying around, and she intuitively picked up that they're from some kind of nether dimensional realm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And increasingly, because of our hookup, whether we want it to or not, this connection to the Internet of Things, and increasingly because of the treatments rolled out the last few years, these nano chips and these operating systems essentially are inside people, and those that have managed to survive the treatments up to this point,
Mm-hmm.
for all intents and purposes, they are now a walking, talking transmitter, sender, and receiver of information, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what they've done is they've plugged us. First, they worked on our minds through cinema, through cultural Marxism, and socialism, and all these isms that tend to separate us, detach us from the divine source, and put us in that happy hunting ground, that mental arena where rage and animosity, mistrust, what have you, is the order of the day, right? So many of these people that are under this malign entity influence They have
Mhm.
repetitive thought loops. They have low impulse control, what have you. So all that was going on, and then layered on top of that, now you have the internet. Now you have the digital devices, and I've said this before. I'll say it again. The digital devices we're surrounded with today are a direct outgrowth of what was found at the debris field at Roswell and other alien crash retrieval sites, and also is a direct result also of this liaison between deep black elements of the
Mhm.
industrial military industrial complex and, for lack of a better term, aliens. Uh, Places like MIT have been working on microcircuitry based on alien technology for 70 plus years by now, right? So
Mhm.
they've had a long time to, I mean, the La Quinta team, I think they're called Quinta, La Quinta, I can't remember, from Portugal or Spain. They say straight up that the nanotech, the graphene, all that in the treatments, it's alien technology. They say straight up, it's non-human, and I would agree with that. Right?
Mhm.
The Wright brothers got off the ground in 1903. Now we're talking about nano operating systems inside of
Mhm.
people. Right? How did that happen so fast? 122,
Yeah.
123 years, something like that. That's beyond exponential. That's many magnitudes beyond exponential
Mhm.
growth. Something else is going on. So there's
Yes.
always been this ghost in the machine aspect, the ability of the spirit world to interface with technology, and we see it in spades now. It's like uh, my wife and I were just talking about this. She didn't even verbalize this product or service she was interested in. She just thought about it, and then immediately it starts showing up in her news feeds and her
Mhm.
social media ads. Right, the
She
very
didn't say it
thing.
aloud?
She didn't say it aloud. So
Wow.
we know that these digital devices are
Mhm.
listening devices, and
Yep.
when we say things, algorithms start kicking and what have you. But now we know that the military has this ability too for some time, the ability to read thoughts, and certainly these entities do, because a lot of people that would call themselves targeted individuals or people in these projects, uh,
Mhm.
they describe hearing popping sounds and this thumping kind of whooping sound
Yep.
in the walls, right? And there were times, and I tend to think that it's a fudge factor with these military people or these non-human entities doing this to me. I would
Mhm.
think of something, and sometimes I wouldn't even complete the thought. But the direction where my brain waves and my thoughts were headed, it was usually something to do with self-recrimination, something to do with I wouldn't say self-loathing, but regret, right, or
Mhm.
shame or something. And even before I got that thought form out, I would hear and feel like this push, in lack of a better term, a
Mhm.
pressure exerted on a part of the wall, or I hear a loud popping sound,
Do you feel
right?
it go in between? Because I always feel it. I can feel, like, pressure coming through my system, and it always happens in my ears. Like, I'm
Yes,
clairaudient, like, I hear things, and it comes through my ears, and I know something has happened. Do you feel that
yes,
ever?
I can feel that
Okay.
too. I used to hear like these Morse type beeps in my left
Mhm.
ear, and I
Me
used to
too.
hear, yeah,
Left
and I
ear,
used
it's
to hear
yeah.
uh, what sounded like military communications in my
Mhm.
head at times. This happened a
Mhm.
lot when I was in San Diego. If I was laying in bed a certain way, right?
Mhm.
I don't know if it
Mhm.
had to do with
Yeah.
fillings in my mouth or whatever the case may be, but I would start hearing what sounded like military communications. Again, our DNA, our very DNA, are
Yep.
senders and receivers of information, and we plug into an information field whether we realize it or not. So
Yep.
this is what they do. They it's a full spectrum dominance thing. They
Mhm.
mess with our minds with this cultural Marxism in the schools and
Yep.
cinema, and then they put these so-called treatments in people, and then we're not even getting into issues of Morgellons and all this other stuff. I mean, this is a very hostile environment in which we reside. It's a multiple threat environment, and people
Mhm.
really should start to understand that. To this day, when there's some channels, Tubi, live streaming networks that most of the abductees that are interviewed in these many UFO documentaries, varying quality, right? A lot of
Mhm.
cheesy special effects, what have you, but often as not, the people they interview that have had experiences, they tend to be of the love and light, warm and fuzzy ET variety type
Mhm.
contactee instead of people like us, right?
Right.
Now, I'm as positive as anyone. I'm a glass half full kind of guy, right? But I'm not going to overlook or sidestep what's going on here. That this is a reptilian sphere of influence, and the human race, the latest iteration of it, is under parasitic,
Mm-hmm.
predatory assault on all levels. So
Mm-hmm.
the sooner we realize that, and the sooner we realize that it's a non-human intelligence that's behind it, the better off we'll be. Because what they've done is bad enough that they've made us fight amongst each other. Uh, Lo these many centuries through religious wars and one ideology pitted seemingly against another ideology. But now it's just a war amongst ourselves. It's male against female. It's race against
Mm-hmm.
race. It's
Yeah.
you see what I mean? That there's something completely unnatural about that, and we have to recognize the root cause of this. And once we
Mm-hmm.
recognize that there's a non-human intelligence involved, and we zoom out, then we can zoom back in and start taking constructive measures. So I want to thank you for letting me come on
Yeah.
your show, and definitely want to have you come back on my show sometime.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I know that you're going to have to go to work soon, but I just wanted to ask you one other question. What message do you want to give to humanity right now
We've had
during
our
this
backs up
time?
against we've had our backs up against the wall. Our
Mm-hmm.
solar system is subject to celestially driven cyclical cataclysms,
Mm-hmm.
and there have been literal interplanetary wars in our solar system where there should be another large planet. There's just an asteroid field, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and then Dr. John Brandenburg talks about the proof, the evidence that at least two super large thermonuclear blasts have been detonated in the Martian atmosphere. So that means that there's been at least two planets in our solar system plagued by alien interference, Earth
Mm-hmm.
and Mars, right? And they're connected. So point being is that we've had our back against the wall, and even after these geologic cataclysms and these extinction level events have occurred, you can see it in the fossil record. Mankind, humanity seems to survive. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that no matter what comes down the pike, and I think the second sun, Nibiru, the Nemesis, call it what one will, is now in our solar system, and it's having a manifold effect on our planet as well as the other planets in our solar system in the form of seismic activity, increased volcanic activity, et cetera, et cetera. As time goes on, we're going to see more of that. And the powers that be, they know we're up against this celestially driven timetable. So do
Mm-hmm.
the aliens. That's why they're putting all their chips on the table now. They're pulling out all the
Mm-hmm.
stops. So we must be aware of the fact that the clock is ticking. Okay, we just can't just sit on our haunches and just wait for something to come along and pull our chestnuts out of the fire. We got to
Mm-hmm.
meet whatever benevolent force is out there that wants to help us, and I do believe that they exist. Because I know that if I was in a spaceship visiting some similarly benighted planet somewhere and the denizens are undergoing all this manipulation and grief, I know in my heart I would want to help them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And since we are the extended family of not just one but a number of different ET races, because I only talked about an earthly incarnation. Some of
Yeah.
us, and I'm satisfied, have had incarnations as what we would call human or aliens rather.
Yeah.
So we are boots on the ground for an extended ET family, and also guardian angels, things like that. I know they exist.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a large cheering section for us, but we just can't assume they're going to come pull our chestnuts out of the fire. We got to meet them halfway at least, and that
Mm-hmm.
starts here, and that starts here. Get our head out of the whole happy hunting ground of this mental arena of these repetitive thought loops and of despair, hopelessness, etc., and get back into a heart-centered, embodied state,
Mm-hmm.
and move forward because we will turn this around. There's going to be some survivors after all this, and I think eventually our destiny is to get off this planet and go back to the cosmos from whence we came.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, James, for your time. And you have a fascinating story and so much knowledge. And I just appreciate you coming on the show and sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie.
Yeah.